Hello, everyone. I'm here with Paul Schafer, with whom I've been in contact since the publishing of my book, Politics of Being. And Paul has shared with me his life work, I would say, on culture. And I'm very glad today to be speaking with him on his work. First, Paul, could you please introduce yourself and tell us, what has led you to this work and your focus on culture?
Well, thank you very much, Thomas. It's a pleasure to be conducting this Zoom meeting with you today. I've had an interesting life, as you have. I was originally trained as an economist and taught economics for many years. So I was fascinated to find when I met you that you also studied economics and did a PhD in environmental economics. Your experience following that was a little different than mine. After I taught economics for a number of years, I became very concerned about the fact that economics as a discipline ignored the natural environment, and this caused more and more problems for me. This is going back some 60 years now. So I decided to get out of that field and try and find an area where I could be intellectually more comfortable. And I started working actively in the arts and taught arts administration and cultural policy. But increasingly over the last 40 years or so, I've focused on trying to understand more about culture and cultures. And so that's what I've been doing in the latter part of my life. And I've been writing a number of books and articles on the subject of culture and cultures and their importance going forward into the world of the future.
Thank you, Paul. Most of your work, you are advocating to move away from an economic age towards a cultural age. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Yes, this has been the main theme of all of my research and writing. Once I left economics, I started to call the age that evolved from Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations to the present an economic age, because I felt that the highest priority in the world was given to economics, economies, and economic growth, and that warranted calling it an economic age. During this age, enormous benefits have accrued to humanity as a result of living in an economic age and learning how to create goods, services, and material and monetary wealth. But increasingly, in the last few decades, I think the past is starting to catch up with us, and we're realizing that there are now some life-threatening and very dangerous problems in the world, such as climate change and the environmental crisis, colossal disparities in income and wealth, increasing tensions and conflicts between different groups of people and tribes and races, and a number of wars in the world at the present time. And personally, I believe, and this is the basis of my argument, that regardless of how important the economic age has been in human history, it's not capable of coming to grips with those problems, because it was basically designed and developed to create goods and services and material monetary wealth, and not designed to come to grips with those problems. So I thought in the first instance that we have to make a movement out of the economic age and into some other kind of age. And of course, a lot of people have now been involved in believing that that's important going forward into the future, and have different views and opinions and perceptions about what the age of the future should be. My particular take on this is that we should be entering a cultural age, in the sense that the focus in the future should be on culture and cultures and their development, and viewing culture and cultures not only in terms of the arts, humanities, heritage of history, some of the more elevated ideals and objectives in life, which is probably the way most people view culture today, but rather, and ever since Edward Burnett Tyler in 1871 said that culture was defined really by him and anthropologists as the complex whole or the total way of life of people, and that the arts and the humanities and heritage were extremely important in that vision because they were provided the symbols that opened the doors to this much, much broader and more holistic understanding of culture and cultures. And but ultimately, if we're going to talk about, monumental and systemic changes in the world of the future, then we can't abandon the fact that culture in this holistic sense as a basic way of life for all of us. There are different lifestyles and views of what life and living are all about on Earth, but basically we're all involved in culture as a way of life, regardless of its families, if it's in communities, towns, cities, national cultures, international cultural relations, the culture of other species, plants and animals, and so on, also have their cultures. So I believe that we can really, this definitional and perceptual problem concerning culture has caused a great deal of difficulty in the world over the last 4 or 5 decades. But I think in the end, there's only one really essential way to see culture and cultures, and that is as complex wholes and total ways of life made up of many parts, of which economics and economies are a very important part. So I'm not talking about the abandonment of the economic age or the capabilities that have been developed in the economic age, but rather that culture in this holistic, all-inclusive sense, all-encompassing sense, incorporates economies and economics in this broader view and definition of culture and cultures. And that it also provides, and this is exceedingly important going into the future, the context for economics and economies, which it never had in the beginning when it was developed, because people that in classical economics, neoclassical economics, contemporary economics, Keynesian economics, as you know, did not see economics in a context. They were so preoccupied with economics as a discipline and what it could achieve that they ignored the context. And so what I'm saying is that in a cultural age, the culture and cultures could provide that context. And as a result of this, they can create economics and economies and economic growth or prosperity, as many people are now calling it, in the bigger context of culture, human beings, the natural environment, and other species. So you see, economics is really part of culture. Culture isn't part of economics, which is the basic belief we all have today. So that's where I'm at in trying to make a strong case for giving much more attention to culture and cultures going forward into the future. And this is really the message that is set out in my recently published book, The Great Cultural Awakening. And the subtitle of this book is Key to an Equitable, which has to do with different redistributions of income, sustainable, which has to do with moving from having more to being more, which we talk about in a moment, and which brought you and I together so closely. And finally, harmonious age, that this is how we could deal with the great conflicts and polarizations and disharmonies that are going on in the world today. So that's really the essence of the book. It's obviously an awakening, it's a transformation. I've often in my work looked for some kind of symbol or metaphor in the natural world that's consistent with the way, with my being and my thinking and my acting. And in this particular case, Thomas, I've come to the conclusion that the closest metaphor that I can find in nature to what this transformation is really all about is the transformation that takes place from the caterpillar to the butterfly. And we know when we look into the stages in that transformation that caterpillars start out as caterpillars. They amble slowly, carefully along the ground, but with persistence, with commitment, with dedication. They climb walls and trees in the same way. In the process of doing that in that early stage, they do go through some small transformations. They do change their bodies and their minds in some very obvious ways that are well documented by biologists. But after that certain period of time, in a metaphorical sense, which I would equate with the economic age, where we all advance in terms of creating material and monetary wealth and goods and services, they enter into a cocoon. And in that cocoon, they go through a transformative process. And it's a transformative process that's created by themselves. Doesn't come from somewhere else. It comes from within the caterpillars who transform their bodies and their lives into some other form. And I would equate this with the transformation that's going on in the world today, which I'll talk about in a moment. But once that cocoon period, it's not the end. It's just the transformation. Once that transformative period is over, then they move into another stage, which is the butterfly stage. And they emerge in the world in a new form, in the form of a butterfly, or in the case of all caterpillars, or most caterpillars, butterflies, beautiful butterflies that have roots and wings and fly out into the world and do what they do in the world as a very particular and interesting species. So that metaphor, in my view, is really very symbolically related to my belief that a transformation is needed now with humanity and the world from the caterpillar stage or the economic stage to the butterfly stage.
Thank
So
you,
there
Paul.
it is. That's the basic argument in terms of an economic age and a cultural age, and a metaphor of a caterpillar and a butterfly.
And moving beyond the metaphor, could you tell us, what would be different in a cultural age than in an economic age in our societies?
The basic difference, as documented in great detail in this book, The Great Cultural Awakening, and in an earlier book that I wrote on the world as culture, trying to make the case that really we're living in a cultural age already and just don't realize it because we've been preoccupied with the economic age. But in this particular cultural age, the shift that is necessary is not a difficult one in terms of an idea, and that is that cultivation and development of culture and cultures in the world should replace the development of economics and economies, but culture and cultures in the holistic sense, whereas economics and economies, we only see life in a partial sense. And that has much to do with how we've been indoctrinated into the economic age, which is a larger discussion. We share arrangement with another cultural scholar, Brian Houlihan, who's a good friend of mine. And Brian is making the argument in his research and writing, and he's a very, very profound cultural scholar, as I think people will find out in the future. And his basic argument is that there's a paradise on Earth already. And that paradise on Earth is really revealed through broadening and deepening our awareness of culture and cultures in general, and the different cultures in the world in particular. If you really start to immerse yourself deeply in culture and cultures, you find that there are enormous differences, and some of those differences create difficulties, others create possibilities and benefits, which I've always felt was why in all my writings on culture, I should look at culture and cultures as beacons of the future, because they have to be able to shed light on a path forward in the future, but they also have to warn us of impending danger, that we have to set in place the necessary safeguards and precautions to make sure that culture and cultures are used for positive or rather than negative purposes, because in the past they've been used for a lot of negative purposes, and we should never allow ourselves to forget that or realize how and why that happened. But in the future, there can be this paradise if we really get immersed in the study and experience of culture and cultures and the different cultures of the world. So to me, this is a very exciting period. I'm very optimistic and hopeful about the future, and believe through understanding the need for this kind of transformation, we can make a move forward. Now, one can say, well, is that pie in the sky or isn't it pie in the sky? I would argue it isn't pie in the sky, because that transformation has already started and is actually quite well advanced. And it started as a result of the experiences and the understanding and the insights and perceptions of the native peoples, of Black people, of people in colonized countries in many different parts of the world, who are involved right at the present time in reconnecting with their original cultures, with their roots, with their traditions, with their languages, with their customs, with their rituals, with their myths and mythologies. That process is already going on in the world and very well developed. And that's not the only part of the great cultural awakening. We're also finding that there are many more people that want to travel in the world to experience cultures, not as tourists, basically, but as cultural tourists that are interested in studying these cultures before they go, immersing themselves in these cultures when they're there, and learning things that are very helpful in transforming their own lives, because they've made an effort to understand what somebody else believes and speaks rather than what they believe and speak. This is also going on, as we know, in the field of organizations as a result of the work of Edgar Schein, who talked about and introduced the idea of organizational cultures. Many organizations in the world today, whether it's police forces, hospitals, government organizations and institutions, profit and nonprofit organizations, corporations, are re-examining themselves from a cultural rather than an economic perspective, and concluding that they have to give much more consideration to their clients, their employees, their processes, their production capabilities, how they're interacting with the world and other corporations and with governments, and in the whole, giving a lot more thought to what are the important foundations and principles and assumptions on which they're based going forward into the future. So we are hearing the word culture and the words cultures, as well as words like change the culture, systemic cultural change, not incremental change, but systemic cultural change, not incremental or piecemeal economic change. These are becoming now, as I'm finding every day in things I read and programs I watch in television and articles I write in newspapers, these are becoming common words in the lexicon of people everywhere in the world. Change the culture, systemic cultural change. We're getting more and more comfortable with those terms. So this leads me to the next question, which very much involves the seminal role that you have played and are playing in your own work. And that is how can we really bring this cultural age into existence as a practical reality and not just a theoretical concept. And I believe this depends very fundamentally on three specific groups of people. The first group is the people that are in the arts, humanities, heritage of history, cultural studies, anthropology, sociology, cultural studies, psychology, biology, zoology. These people are all studying different aspects of culture, as we know. They have to come together as more of a group and work as a group. And I think they have to play the leadership role in all this. It's got to come from that group. But where do we go from here? Well, I think there's only one real place we can go, and that's to government and political institutions. And your work has been in the work you've done on the politics of being, which I would strongly recommend everybody read and read very carefully and ponder over what the great wisdom and understanding of science is in this book. Uh, you've made the case that the key transformation in this area has to come from governments and political institutions. And what's crucial in that, as I learned by benefiting from reading your book very carefully several years ago, that comes basically from thinking in terms of having more to being more. Hence the title of your book, because you're making the argument there that governments have to get more involved in understanding how important this particular transition or transformation is by emphasizing going forward into the future that being more rather than having more opens the doors to a whole new structure and method of operations for political and governmental institutions, and particularly governance in the world of the future. They have to play a proactive and leadership role in this too. Ultimately, just to conclude on the my argument about shifting from an economic age to a cultural age, I think that ultimately it all comes down to us as individuals, and individuals that are alone as well as together, are connected through culture, are involved in organizations, are involved in work activities and leisure activities. We have to make the transformation ultimately. If this is going to be successful, it's only going to happen when in the longer term, we recognize how important it is for us to live a cultural life in that holistic, all-encompassing sense that includes other people, other countries, other values, other traditions, other ways of life, and really respects the way other people do things. And we can get out of our own skins and identify in spiritual and compassionate ways with other people and other countries.
Thank you very much, Paul. It was great listening to you. Thanks for dedicating a good part of your life to this question, and really helping all of us with your book, including this last one on the great cultural awakening, to make all these ideas much clearer and yeah, easier for all of us then to build on it. So thank you very much, Paul, and I hope everyone enjoy this conversation, and really recommending to read the work of Paul Schafer, including his last book, The Great Cultural Awakening. Thank you.
Well, Thomas, just in conclusion, thank you very much to you for having me and having this program this morning. And thank you for the leadership role that you've been playing in the world with a variety of constituencies and politics and government organizations and agencies in bringing this to the forefront of the concern of organizations and individuals and institutions like that, and making it a very important part of what we all require going forward into the future, and finding that paradise on earth through coming to grips with a more detailed and intensive understanding of the role that cultures in a cultural age can play in this.
Thank you, Paul. Glad we are working together on this. Thank you.